Chosen Chapters from the Velvet Paw of Asquith novels, also known as the Dooven Books, by Thomas Corfield. Read by the author. Chapter 2 from When Fear Is Not Afraid, Chapter 6, in which Oscar meets Binklmitre, a fellow Velvet Paw on assignment in Barras, a lovely and sunny city with some interesting parking restrictions and unusual policies on umbrella usage. The air was warm and smelt of exhaust and exhaustion. A hard sun beat through haze and baked everything into a crispness that left Oscar feeling sorry for fish fingers. He wandered past narrow laneways which, although in shade, nevertheless smoked in a manner suggesting most of Barras was medium rare. Despite the baking heat, there was a splendidness about the place that accosted him the moment he'd landed at its airport. This was partly because not crashing into runway goes a long way to establishing a positive first impression anywhere. Moreover, the taxi he'd seconded from it hadn't crashed either, which contributed further to his delight, especially when Barras had the sort of traffic that can only be described as violently congested. As a result, Oscar wandered along a pavement with the sort of pleasure that generally accompanies the discovery that a four-course meal is not only paid for, but includes a parking voucher and complimentary pen. All he required was a nice mug of chilled hot Fin at a cafe under an umbrella, and he'd find himself more content than an exhausted narcoleptic on an uncommitted Sunday morning. When a car careered past him, he leapt aside. It bounced across the pavement, collected a rubbish bin and distributed its contents over several pedestrians before collecting the pedestrians. None involved were fussed, however, as the cars in Barras were so dented that when they did drive into pedestrians, their crumpled fenders tended to embrace rather than splatter animals across bitumen. Indeed, Barras' streets were so crowded that driving around a corner could take the best part of a week. This resulted in cars being abandoned halfway around them, which contributed further to congestion. So crowded was Barras that it was often considered to be one enormous intersection. As a consequence, it had only one set of traffic lights. These had been disconnected shortly after installation, however, as its congestion was so violent that drivers had little opportunity to pay them proper attention, a situation that became evident in the number of cars careering into buildings whenever they changed colour. And although this was unacceptable, it did momentarily relieve congestion. Barras's traffic was an endless cabaret of spectacular proportions, and Oscar found its fervour, smoke and screams most agreeable. The city was crowded, hot and furious, which rendered it the sort of place he could wander with a glorious anonymity and populace, which he revelled in until coming across a cafe he was looking for. The cafe was on a corner surrounded by abandoned cars, moving ones and milling pedestrians in an assortment of combinations. There was lots of honking, screeching and banging, and that was just the pedestrians. Abandoned cars rolled amongst the cafe's tables when bumped by those moving, their bonnets flapping until the things crunched into walls or other cars, where their broken doors would wave like disenchanted street performers. Climbing over some crumpled bumpers and an assortment of flattened hubcaps, he claimed a table that was still upright and some chairs that hadn't been smashed. He sat and squinted through blazing sun, keen to order an umbrella for his table along with a chilled hot Fin. A waiter arrived holding a pen over a little pad. When he asked what Oscar might like, he mentioned the umbrella first. "I'm sorry," said the waiter, with no intention of writing it down on his little pad. "An umbrella, please," said Oscar. The waiter glanced about. "An umbrella, sir?" "That's right, an umbrella for my table." "I don't think that's possible, sir." "Well, why not?" "Well, umbrellas can be terribly dangerous for one thing, and for another, they're illegal here." Oscar stopped squinting and blinked instead. "Illegal?" The waiter nodded. "That's right." "It's against the law to have an umbrella on my table?" "Yes, sir, or indeed on your personage. You certainly can't have one on your table." "But why not?" "Because they're illegal." "I'm sorry, what do you mean illegal?" The waiter tapped the pen against his chin in thought. "Let me see. Are you familiar with the word legal?" Oscar nodded deliberately. "Well, it's the opposite." "Illegal. Are you quite sure?" Oh yes, quite certain. I've lived in Barras a long time and know its peculiarities as though they're my own. His pen at the ready, he waited for something more beverage-orientated. Oscar sighed. He liked Barras, but he also liked umbrellas, and their apparent incongruity tainted his impression of the place even more than its exorbitant traffic fatality statistics, which were so high that new numbers had been invented to assist with their calculation. "You're quite certain there isn't even a small one under the counter inside?" he asked. "Perhaps in lost property, left by a customer?" "A traffic statistic? What? No, an umbrella." "No, sir. Barras doesn't have any umbrellas. They're illegal." "Illegal? Yes, look, I must admit to struggling with the notion." It's a legal term, sir." "I'm sorry?" "It's a legal term. It means they're not allowed." I know what it means, but I want to know why." "Well, presumably so members of the legal fraternity can communicate with each other." "No, look, I mean, why are umbrellas illegal here?" The waiter looked up at a sky so cloudless that their absence was probably for legal reasons also. "Well, it doesn't rain here very often for a start," he said. "But more importantly, they can be terribly dangerous." "Umbrellas? Well, don't be ridiculous." "Well, with respect, sir, I'm not the one asking for an umbrella on my table." He pointed at a poster in the cafe's window. It read, "Remember, umbrellas can be deadly." Before Oscar could read any further, a car slammed into the curb, screeched across pavement and bounced through occupied tables. Although its arrival surprised Oscar, it surprised the table's patrons far more, who became gathered in its fenders and slammed into another car that had done something similar earlier. The murmur of dissent arising from said patrons while removing themselves from mangled bodywork was understandable, and once they'd helped the driver out through what was once a door, an argument erupted about who was responsible for the spilt hot fins. The driver, brushing himself down, was equally indignant and insisted it was their fault if they were foolish enough to be anywhere near a pavement. The argument escalated until a third car ploughed into the first two and collected them all communally. Since it was driverless, they agreed to split the bill evenly, especially considering the table already had been. Oscar watched them unlock themselves from crumpled fender a second time and stumbled to an unshattered table, which they sat at by improvising some stools from recently shattered table. He turned back to the poster. It had a picture of some shattered tables upon which patrons were draped after having been impaled by umbrellas originally upon them. The point was indisputable. "Is rush hour always like this?" Oscar asked the waiter, before cringing when a sound of shattered car followed some screeching tyres. "What do you mean hour?" After some blinks, Oscar asked for a chilled hot fin. "Though I can wait," he said, "as it might be prudent to get their orders first." He indicated the disgruntled patrons who, having attempted to sit on shattered table, realised it was too shattered to be sat on and tried reclaiming their shattered chairs instead, which were better suited to propping up the shattered table than their bottoms, unless they found something they could improvise as table legs after all. It was a pity they didn't have any umbrellas. "I must say, I find your city terribly exciting," Oscar said, contributing to the small round of applause offered in light of their recovery. "But wouldn't some sort of fence be wise?" There was another bang, which had Oscar and the waiter cringe again. "Where would we put a fence?" the waiter asked, as a car seat sailed overhead. Oscar looked around, realising the pavement had barely enough room for shattered tables amongst its abandoned cars. "The abandoned cars do as good a job as protecting us as anything might," the waiter said, "although I must admit that working in Barras's cafes is rather like playing an incessant game of pinball. Mind you, if things get really bad, we go inside. The walls generally stop anything really dangerous." "Generally?" By way of illustration, a car slid, screeched and slammed into an array of abandoned cars. It somersaulted across them, showering patrons in a rain of shattered bodywork until becoming lodged in an upper-story window where it teetered and creaked in quiet smoulder. Oscar turned back to the waiter. "Oh, perhaps make that 2 chilled hot fins," he said, "and forget about the umbrella." The waiter nodded before hurrying to those trying to re-establish their bottoms on shattered outdoor furniture. At a table nearby, a dog peered at him from behind a newspaper. When Oscar smiled, the animal lowered his paper and rolled it up. He stood, tucked it under his paw and approached. The dog asked, "Would you like an umbrella?" "I would like one for my table, yes," said Oscar. "Why?" "Well, because it would be perfect." Perfect for what? What, a cliched postcard that I could then send home? And where is home exactly? Oh, the same place as yours, I believe. To this, the dog nodded, sat down at Oscar's table and held out a paw. Binklmitre, he said, VP of A. Oscar took his paw before returning it, as was the custom. Oscar teabagged Dooven, VP of A also. I believe I made the mistake of assuming the waiter was you. I get that a lot, the dog said. It must be the hat. Oscar looked at his head. But you're not wearing a hat. I meant the waiter's. But the waiter isn't wearing one either. Which makes it all the more bizarre, don't you think? Before Oscar could reply, some burgeoning street-related cabaret began nearby, consisting of blaring horns and yelling pedestrians. Have you been here long? Oscar asked, after glancing at it. Binklmitre shrugged. About half an hour. No, I meant here in Barras, watching this peculiar creature named the Yardathur. Another shrug. Oh, well, quite a bit longer, yes, definitely before last Thursday. I remember that because I had to return a library book. The cabaret grew in volume and involved a veritable swathe of traffic arguing with a small army of pedestrians. It must be an extraordinary place to live, Oscar shouted as it marched past. Very exciting, I should imagine. What? I said it must be very exciting to be assigned here. Well, if one likes this sort of thing, said Binklmitre, but I much prefer Asquith. There's less sun for a start and the umbrellas are legal. The veritable swathe coalesced into a sort of badly choreographed musical with a libretto composed entirely of profanities. Tell me what you know of this Yardathur creature, Oscar said. More shrugs from the dog. Well, that's the problem. Not a lot. Or more specifically, nothing at all. He has a routine that involves going out for a stroll in the evening and then going back home again. He stopped when their chilled hot fins arrived. And that's it? Oscar asked, sipping his and retching. There's nothing more you know of him? Binklmitre frowned in thought. Well, he breathes air. At least I presume he does. But anything else I offer is also presumption. Well, like what exactly? Well, he eats food. He has carpet. He eats carpet? No, he has carpet in his house. Again, presumably. After some more blinks, Oscar said, Anything else? Well, presumption-wise? Well, ideally not. Another frown followed by, Well, he has at least one lavatory. The frown deepened and he looked away. Unless that's why he goes out for a stroll. Binklmitre, even I could have come up with those things. Yes, agreed Binklmitre. Well, that's the marvellous thing about presumptions. They're so presumptuous. Mind you, when the catacombs advised that another Velvet Paw was coming to Barras, I was worried about having nothing more to offer, which is where the presumptions came in. Presumptions are really great when you think about it, because not only are they limited by imagination, but justified by it as well. He fiddled through his pockets. Anyway, I put together a small dossier stating pretty much what I've just mentioned, minus the presumptions. Minus them? Yes, I was planning on using them as a sequel. A sequel? It wasn't asked as a question. Yes, you know, if the dossier did particularly well. He continued searching. Right, look, Binklmitre, do you have it or do you have fleas? Why, it's here somewhere. At least I think it is. He paused. Unless that's also a presumption. After a final rummage, he pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. It's really more of a draft at the moment. But you just said you'd put it together. The frown returned. What, the sequel? No, the dossier. Oh, yes, sorry. I was being presumptuous. May I see it? Well, I haven't written it yet. I was going to see how this one went. Not the sequel, your dossier. It was offered, and Oscar took it, amazed to see it had the very sentence Binklmitre mentioned scrawled in pencil upon it. That's it, Oscar said. This is all you've come up with since being instructed to watch this creature, going outside for a stroll for a bit, and then going back home again. Well, it's succinct and to the point. Oscar sighed. Where does he live? Well, in his villa. No, I mean specifically. Where does he live specifically? Well, specifically in his villa. Oscar leant his head upon a paw. And where does he go, Binklmitre, and for how long? Well, specifically, yes. Frowning, Binklmitre counted the answers off on his paws. His villa, a stroll, and for a bit. Oscar stared, stunned to meet a Velvet Paw apparently more useless than he. Honestly, Mr. Dooven, there's nothing more I can offer. The animal is a veritable recluse. He comes out in the evening, goes for a bit of a stroll, and then goes home again. I suspect the highlight of his day is using a door. There's really nothing more that can be added. Under the circumstances, that dossier is brimming with detail. It's short, admittedly, which is why I made the full stop at the end of it so large. Oscar read the sentence again in case he'd missed something, like a second one, for example. When it was clear he hadn't, he asked, "Have you been inside his villa?" A shake of head. "I was only ordered to observe him. When that dossier was all I could come up with, I presume the catacombs decided they need something more by sending you. You can take me there at least?" He nodded. "That much I can manage, certainly. I've rented a little place not far from his. It's in a rather splendid part of town down by the docks. I wouldn't mind living there myself long term, but I don't know if I could live without umbrellas." He leant forward. "Did you know that they're illegal here?" Oscar nodded. "Umbrellas? Illegal, if you please. It's absurd." The waiter was startled by a flying hubcap. When he stumbled sideways, the chilled hot fins upon his tray spilt on Oscar. "Well, my word!" Binklmitre cried. "What a perfect advertisement for their necessity, Dooven. You should begin a campaign." Later that afternoon, the two Velvet Paws waited by the window in Binklmitre's apartment. It overlooked a beautiful collection of villas cascading down toward the sea. The sun was already low, and its reddening light bathed the terracotta city in more of the same. Tiled roofs lined the street, their rusting brown framing the reds of masonry beneath. Tall mops of palm trees, outlining laneways down to the dark purple of sea, swayed beneath the dispersing heat of day. Were it not for the abandoned cars littering the street below, Oscar would consider the place on par with Rouen. But because they were all over the place, with some of them upside down, he did not. Abandoned cars were unbefitting to a scene so lovely, so he tried pretending they were parked that way intentionally, except for those lodged in windows, which he tried pretending were curtains. They sipped some hot fin and waited. "The Arthur won't leave until it's dusk," Binklmitre said. "It's always dusk when he leaves, and dark, like his clothing. I get the distinct impression he would rather no one saw him at all." They waited. "Perhaps I should have put that in my report," Binklmitre realised. "I wouldn't worry. The catacombs have a lot of photographs regarding that sort of detail." "Why is there so much fuss over him anyway? He's a recluse who goes out for a stroll. Why are the catacombs interested?" "Because his apparent introversion is the opposite of what he's famous for. Moreover, the catacombs have evidence that he does rather more than wander around docks at dusk. It appears he's far more active than your meticulously detailed dossier suggests." This was met with sips and blinks. "Apparently," Oscar continued, "the Arthur has a tendency to travel the world in a manner most peculiar." "In what way peculiar?" "Instantaneously." "What do you mean by that?" "That, Binklmitre, is what we're going to find out."